Good evening, Rink Rats. Hope you are all doing well. Welcome, Season 6, Episode 11, to the Chicago Blackhawks 2023 Draft Preview. We've been doing a lot of homework lately, and in 3 days' time, in fact, 3 days from right this moment, this Wednesday coming up, the Chicago Blackhawks and the NHL will have the annual NHL Entry Round Draft. You all know the big news. The Blackhawks have the number 1 overall pick, but tonight, we're going to dive into the rest of the draft. We're going to talk about their needs. We're going to talk about who's on the board. We've got 2 usual suspects here tonight, and hopefully Sean Fitzgerald will be joining us, as well as a guest appearance from a guy called The Fork. We're waiting to see who he is. We hear he's a great guy. Eric Andrews, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Like you said, we've got about 3 days until the next era of Blackhawks hockey begins, and I cannot wait.
Going to be outstanding. Barter, are you feeling similarly? Are you excited for Wednesday night? Welcome. How have you been, buddy?
Oh, yeah. Doing great. Very much looking forward to it. Should be a fun night.
Awesome. So, folks, I'm on a bit of having some technical difficulties. I usually talk very fast anyway, but if you're watching online, my mouth is not catching up to my voice. Sorry, having some internet difficulty out in the northern woods in northern Michigan. But at any rate, we know who's going number 1. The whole continent knows who's going number 1 overall. Folks, don't be duped. All these rumors, what would you trade Bedard for? The number 1, would they do it for McDavid and a few other guys? It's not happening. 3 days from today, Connor Bedard is going to walk up onto the podium. He is going to accept a Chicago Blackhawks jersey. He's going to put it on. He's going to look great. Generational talent. We're all really excited about it. And so don't believe the clickbait if people are saying this ain't going to happen, because it is. We'll see what happens after that. There are plenty of great prospects out there. Adam Fantilli, Leo Carlson, Michkov, another one from Russia. Everyone's a little confused on how that is going to land, where he's going to go. Most likely he will go in the top 10, but dominoes will fall, particularly after that pick. And so what we want to start with tonight is we want to talk about round 1, pick number 19 that the Chicago Blackhawks do have. So we're assuming tonight that they're going to make this pick. And all signs might be pointed that direction, but who knows? Kyle Davidson might pull something off. He might move up. Bardo, we're going to get to Eric Andrews. First of all, if you have not read Eric Andrews' latest article on the Blackhawks needs before the upcoming draft, do it. All right? It's the best one out there. It is the most accurate. He is very comprehensive in his approach to analyzing prospects. Yes, Eric, I'm pumping your tires. Sorry if I'm embarrassing you, but so you better deliver on tonight's podcast, because we're going to be asking a lot of you. Before we get to Eric and some of the players out there at 19, Bardo, what do you want to see the Hawks do with 19? Like, what are some of the needs? What kind of player are we looking at for 19?
So I think it comes down to, I think size is going to be something that I definitely think they need to explore at that pick, or, if they end up moving up or down. I think size is definitely something. We can't sit here and say that it's going to make sense for them to draft a couple of Smurfs, but the team has, some prospects and in their system. And for the most part, the prospects that they have are on the smallish side. So I think it comes down to trying to find somebody who can skate well, who brings some size. I prefer building with centers. So I'm hoping the Hawks would take a center there. If one exists, that makes sense, but we'll see. I'm not a big fan of taking wings in the first round unless they're, 100% can't miss guys like, Kane or whatever. But quite frankly, I'm big on building with D-men as well as centers, and it's a weak first round for defensemen. So I think if they can get a center, I would take a center.
Gotcha. Yeah. Weak first round for defensemen. However, talent-rich first round everywhere else, it seems like. And I think, Eric, I'm sure you agree with me, and you've said it before, maybe one of the best first-round draft classes in a long time, headed this way, that you're going to hear about more on Wednesday. To Bardo's point, though, real quick, is, and folks, we're not saying little guys can't play in the NHL. That's not the point. The point is that the Blackhawks first round picks as far as forward depth lately have been Lucas Reichel, Frank Nazar, and now will be Connor Bedard, all of which are under 6 feet tall. And if you look at the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who just won the NHL, there's some big, big boys out there. So the size factor is important. I agree with that 100%. Eric, with size in mind, how are you feeling about center? Yeah, and they have to skate. So, Eric, with size in mind, thinking center, maybe wing, it seems like there's some big boys that are wingers. Who are some of your favorite targets at 19 that could be available there, or who the Hawks should be eyeballing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to touch on a couple things you guys mentioned there, I wholeheartedly agree that size definitely needs to be a focus, especially at 19th overall, assuming that's where they make the pick. Now, of course, like we said, is size the end all be all? No, it is not. But like you also, stated, when you already have 3 guys in that, expected long-term top 6 that are under 6 feet, you got to add some size to that. You cannot have 4 or 5 guys that, doesn't mean they're not strong on their skates, doesn't mean they can't win a board battle here and there. But like you said, we've seen in the playoffs, year after year, and this year, no exception, you got to have some size up front if you are expecting to go far. So yes, I absolutely agree with that. As far as some of those fits, to me, it's not so much about the position. I mean, I definitely agree with what Bard says. You would ideally love to have really strong center depth for sure. All the cup winning teams are probably going to have, 2 or 3 really strong centermen. But, to me, it's more about the traits that this player is going to have and the profile and kind of the style of game that they play and how that will complement not only the prospects that they currently have and will have, but, kind of the vision of the organization moving forward. So, to me, when I think of that, one player that immediately jumps to mind that I think there's at least a reasonable chance that he'll be there at 19 is Quentin Musty from the OHL. Not like a huge guy, but I think I want to say he's like 6'2", high 100s. I think he's a little under 200 pounds, but a guy that can, kind of play that power style of game without just being, a bruiser type of guy. He's a skilled player first and foremost, but having that bigger frame kind of allows him to play a little bit more of a power style of game. And he's a very creative player, really good playmaker. So, if you were able to get him and pair him with the Connor Bedard, that could be a really, really, really good duo, for a number of years to come. So that's kind of, I would say, almost like my main hope is that Quentin Musty is available there. Couple other guys, Matthew Wood is a guy that I know you really like, Andy. I really like him as well. He's also very much in that power forward type of a mold. He's bigger than Musty. He's 6'4", and I want to say around 200, a little bit over 200 pounds, but just kind of has that more of a prototypical power forward type of game. But again, a very skilled player. He's a very good goal scorer. So that could kind of be interesting. Would you want to pair that with Bedard, or would you want to split them up on separate lines? What that might look like. But just kind of that profile of, this is a big-bodied, strong player that still has that skill. I would probably say it's 50-50 at best that Wood is still there at 19. I am not counting on that being the case. So that's kind of like the pipe dream. If he's there, that would be awesome, but not getting my hopes up too much about that. Another guy that is kind of an interesting one because some people see him more as a winger, some people see him more as a center, or a guy that could potentially be a center is Samuel Hanzik out of the WHL as well. A big guy. I want to say he's 6'4", 6'5", just a big body, but he can skate really well for his size. So that is, obviously something that I'm sure the Blackhawks would find very intriguing is, that combination of size, skating, and skill, and, a little bit of that versatility as well. He's a guy I could see going as high as, maybe 13th or 14th overall, but he still could be there at 19 for the Hawks as well.
Yep. Nice. I love those takes. Yeah. Folks, Matthew Wood, who Eric just talked about, he's going to be a freshman at UConn next year. He is big, he's strong, he's powerful, 200 pounds. I think that with the Buffalo, and Eric and I have been going back and forth on this, with the Buffalo Sabres picking at 13, he is kind of that Tage Thompson mold, and a player that they obviously, Thompson quantum leap in his game this year. So the idea Buffalo will still be probably forward driven in this process. So he might go after that. Buffalo might go after Wood right there. Hanzik, the player you just mentioned, a lot of people have been talking about that Pittsburgh might take a run at him at 14. It sounds like Musty should be available at 19. The hope is that he really is. The other two could go earlier, but it's the draft. I mean, anything happens. Players slide. One player that Eric, I'll ask you to comment on, and Bart, if you know anything about him, another player that might be in those late teens is Colby Barlow from Owen Sound. Seems like he doesn't exactly have the height, but he's thicker and he's rugged and he grinds it out in the corners. Would he be a good fit?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say that he's kind of more in terms of like the draft stock is looking at that way. I would say he's kind of more in that Matthew Wood tier, where I would be surprised if he was still there at 19 when the Hawks are picking, or if they're picking at 19. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely a solid player. Like you said, he doesn't have, a huge frame, but he's just a strong bodied guy that, knows how to use his body well. I want to say he's around like 6 feet or 6'1", something like that. But he's just a solid kind of stockier type of player.
He's got a heavy shot though.
Yes. Very good shot. Very good shot. So,
again, I've seen the highlights of him. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So, and that's, kind of going back to Matthew Wood too, do you want to have, kind of another sniper type of player to put next to Bedard, or would you want to split that up? A lot of people have had the debate of, is Connor Bedard going to be an elite level goal scorer and that's going to be his primary offensive tool, or is he going to be more of a playmaker in the NHL? So, that's kind of an interesting thing. I guess, you can never have, I guess you can't have too many goal scorers, but it's never an issue to have guys, that you can kind of move around and stuff like that. So if Colby Barlow was there at 19, that's certainly a guy that I would be interested in for sure.
Let me ask you guys a question on one prospect that I'm intrigued by, but I'm running away from. I'll tell you why, because the two words, work ethic. Anytime I see a player have a questionable work ethic, I just avoid him like the plague. Edouard Sale, who is ridiculously talented. And I remember his name last year because I always like to look ahead and see who's, up there and who's going to be a guy that, what those lists look like a year down the road, especially knowing the Blackhawks were going to be terrible this year. So, and he was a guy a lot of people had in that top 10, top 15, and now he's dropping probably because of that work ethic into the 20s. So, Eric, I'm curious to hear, and Andy, chime in as well, as what you guys think about him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely an intriguing name, kind of for different reasons, I would say, but, kind of in that Michkov type of a conversation, where is this guy going to go? Talent-wise, he's, arguably right up there in the best of the draft. I mean, Bedard is on his own level, but, he can be right up there just as far as the raw talent. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's a very intriguing case because, he has a lot of the raw tools that you really are looking for. He's a very fast skater, good on his edges, but he has just the good straight line speed too, and a very gifted playmaker. So, that's, again, kind of the profile where you say that would be a really good duo to put with Bedard. And he does have, a little bit bigger of a frame. I want to say he's around 6'2", something like that. So, and obviously he can fill out a little bit and put on some muscle, but that's the case for all these guys at this point. So the weight doesn't matter too much, but yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing player, but like you said, when you have that label attached to you of questionable work ethic,
yeah,
it's a tough sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of the younger players in the draft. I mean, he just turned 18 in March. All the scouts, Corey Pronman, et cetera, all the expert analysis out there is that his skill set is elite. That his toolkit, his puck handling, his skating, all of that is good. But but that he's very inconsistent. Like, you just never know what you're going to get night in, night out. I don't know. Kyle Davidson doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would go after anyone if the work ethic was questionable. But I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking. But at the same time, it's, last year's draft was all about speed. Is this year's draft going to be a little bit more about toughness potentially? Is that the kind of player that you want, a running mate for Bedard, where I do think you want someone to win pucks. You want someone with strength who's going to win board battles, who's going to have a little bit of an edge to them. I don't know. I mean, I guess I wouldn't be. I think Sale will go later. I think he'll be available at 19, or all signs are pointing in that direction. But he'd be interesting. I think there's enough good players that someone with a question mark on their work ethic, I don't know if you want to touch that.
No, and I think he's a guy.
There's just so many other players.
Yeah, no, I think he's a guy. If he's in there in the second round, I think, the Hawks have 4 second-round picks. I mean, I can certainly see them taking a flyer on him. I mean, and that's where you sort of put the balls in the hands of your talent development and your coaching that's going to be able to, get this kid's head screwed on. So, and make him more consistent. But sometimes, even the best just aren't able to do that. So, but yeah. That'll be interesting to see where he goes. I'm curious to see what organization he lands in. So, because like you said, he's got world-class talent, but he's got low-class work ethic.
Yeah. Two other names that have been around at 19, or that a lot of people are talking about, Gabriel Perreault and one in particular, Andrew Cristall, who a lot of Blackhawk fans are salivating over, because of his ties to Connor Bedard, because he's a former teammate of him. But 5'9", 167, Perreault, 5'9", 165. Eric, you mentioned in your article, you were very specific, saying if they are going to look for this kind of player, those are the kinds of guys that they're targeting. But it might not be the fit right now, because these guys, smaller in stature, not the physicality, not the bigger player that they should be looking for in 19. Are you standing by those original sentiments, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that these two players in particular, even though they kind of have similar profiles, very, to me, almost polar opposites as far as, what you would kind of be looking for in a player. I really like Gabriel Perreault. I think, just his dynamic, playmaking style and even ability to score goals is really impressive. If he was a bigger player, even if he was 6 feet, 6'1", had some muscle on him. I mean, this is a kid that seriously could be pushing maybe even as high as like 5th, 6th overall. But that smaller frame is gonna limit that ceiling as far as his draft position a little bit. Some people still think that he could maybe even sneak in as high as 10 or 11, but a lot of people think he'll be somewhere in the teens there for sure, just based on the pure skill level and showing that he can really produce offensively. So that's a player that, let's say the Blackhawks had no notable forward prospects. They didn't have Reichel. They didn't have Nazar. If they were going into this and Bedard was their first future top 6 player, I would have no issue taking Perreault if he was there at 19. But going back to what we said, you just can't have, the majority of your top 6 be these smaller types of guys. And, even if he has a little bit of chippiness or whatever, it just isn't going to work long term if that's all you have. So, I really like Gabe Perreault as a player, but I just don't see it being a great fit for the Blackhawks. Now, transition over to Cristall, and I said it in my article, I have zero interest in this player for a number of reasons. Number one, yes, it's a fun narrative. He's buddies with Bedard, all that. That's great. That's fun, whatever. But when you are as small as he is, and again, not that we're just saying size is everything. It's not. But when you are as small as he is, 5'9" or so, and combine that with the fact that he is a below average skater, that is not something that is going to set you up well for success at the NHL level. So, I mean, it's just, to me, 19, you're not even thinking about him. 35, I don't think you're really thinking about him either, because there's probably going to be other players still available. They're going to have, a much more projectable skill set and tool set. So, I don't even think that you consider him at 35. 44, maybe you say this kid's skill is just way above anybody else at this spot. Maybe you take a swing on him at 44. He's not going to last that long. Someone's going to take him late in the first round, maybe early in the second round if he slips that far. But I mean, yeah, it's a total zero interest in Chris Stahl at 19 or even at 35 for me.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Chris Stahl is basically Ray Whitney and probably slower than Ray Whitney. And Perreault, like I agree with everything you said, Eric. I mean, I like the kid. He's got his father's hockey IQ, but the size is just, like you said, if he was 6'1" or 6'2", he'd be probably Jonathan Taves, with that sort of size, skill, and head on his shoulders. That the hockey IQ. So. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, the kid's just going to be too small, and maybe he ends up being a third or fourth line, winger or center. I think he's going to end up at wing, but we'll see. We'll see if he can win faceoffs like his father, but yeah,
unlikely.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think that the skating piece, Eric, as you mentioned, I mean, that's everything. I mean, if you have a substandard skater in the first round, that is the antithesis of Kyle Davidson's mantra. Just really doesn't seem like it fits in. We talked about the Blackhawks prospect pool, or we didn't talk about it. We're going to start mentioning it right now, but their prospect pool right now is pretty strong defensively, particularly what they did last year in the draft with the DeBrincat trade and getting Kevin Korchinski with the 7th overall pick. Then they took Rinzel later in the first round. They had the top 3. They've had 3 defensemen on the Canadian World Junior team, Korchinski being one of them. And Ethan Del Mastro took a quantum leap in his play last year. He was awesome. And then Stansboy, what was his name again? They took him 32 overall.
Nolan Allen.
There you go. Sorry
Allen.
That I forgot. Yeah. Appreciate it. So, I mean, yeah. But there are two defensemen in the draft that, if they fell to 19, could be tempting. One of them is Reinbacher, who I don't think will fall to 19. The other one is Tom Willander. Eric, any chance Willander falls to 19? I don't think so. There are some people out there that think he could fall to 20. And would the Hawks take a run at him if he was there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, starting off with Reinbacher, I think most people would say that he's the best defenseman in the draft class, and some people think that he could go as high as even 5th overall. But I think he's a slam dunk to go in the top 10. I don't see him falling out of the top 10. So, yeah, Reinbacher just is not going to be there at 19 for sure. Willander is an interesting case because even, midway through this season, he was kind of viewed as like a second round, even a later second round type of guy. But just with how much progression he showed throughout this season, and especially at the end of the season, it just shot up the draft board. And, I really like the player. I could see a team taking a shot on him. I've heard, read thoughts from people that he could go even as high as 10th or 11th overall. So it's interesting to kind of see, how high do teams think his ceiling really is. That's probably going to determine where he goes. Like we said, this draft class is just not very strong for the high end defensemen. So, yes, you have Reinbacher up top. He'll be a top pairing defenseman. You've got Axel Sandin Pellikka, who is, pretty much purely an offensive type of defenseman. So again, kind of where teams project his future is probably going to determine where he goes, but, I could certainly see him being gone by 19. So, with Willander, it's an interesting case, just, really thinking about knowing that this draft class is weaker for the high-end defensemen. Our team's going to really prioritize that and, not necessarily reach on defensemen earlier, but knowing, hey, we really need a defenseman and there's just not that many great defenders out there this year. Let's go get him. I can definitely see that happening. You know, I can see the Predators taking him at 15, for example. You know, I think that would be a good fit for them. If he was there at 19, which I would say is probably like 60-40 that he's not available at 19. But, you know, let's take the 40% chance that he is there. I like the player. I think that he would fit in well with what the Hawks are trying to do. However, I would just question, you know, depending on what forwards are available, I would have a hard time picking a defenseman at 19, just knowing that there's going to be a really quality forward or two that's also sitting there. And that's probably, you know, filling out that top 6 is probably a little bit bigger of a need for the Hawks at this point than getting kind of like that one more defensive prospect.
Kyle has also talked quite a bit about how he's really pleased with the group of defensemen that they have. And he's talked about, you know, with, you know, existing players and whether or not they could re-sign them or not, the depth of the organization is, and the strength is on D. So I agree. I don't think they're going to go defenseman, even if Wallinder is there at 19. I do think Reinbacher, though, is going to basically be an Arizona Coyote. I mean, after they traded Chikrin, I think everybody has him going 6 overall. I don't see him going past there. So I think he's like a lock. So if you're in the betting market, do that.
If Montreal passes on him, I could see Montreal taking him.
Yeah, that's a possibility. That's a good point.
But yeah, 6 I think is a good fit for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's the Michkov effect, and I know we're talking mostly about the Chicago Blackhawks, but the most intriguing player name in the entire NHL leading into the draft is Matvei Michkov, the young man from Russia, who a lot of people have said his skill set and his abilities are near the level of Connor Bedard, and he's signed with his Russian team through 2026. And so the idea of someone drafting him right now, they might not see him for a little while, if at all. I think that he hasn't met with NHL clubs. He's just starting to speak with NHL clubs this week, is the rumor. He did not go to the combine. He's been very protected by the folks around him in Russia. He's not really very available for consultation. There are some rumblings that, you know, people like Daniel Briere, if he falls to 7, is just saying, I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm going to go get the best player. The Flyers are a team that are rebuilding, so they certainly have time on their side if he falls to 7. But he's the player that really will change the draft as far as what everyone's thinking. It seems like at 7, there's the Flyers. At 8, there's Washington. I don't think he'll get past that. But then there's some people that are saying he could go as high as 2, that Anaheim could just do it. So I wanted to entertain this for a little bit. I actually don't think he'll get past San Jose or Montreal, personally. But, you know, Eric, I know you have a lot of thoughts on Michkov, and we've obviously talked about it at great length, jested about it at great length as well. If you are picking his landing spot right now, where is it? And then, Bardo, I want to hear what you have to say on this too.
I would say for this draft, it's the $1 million question. I mean, I would agree with you, Andy. I think that he, just based on what he brings to the table, he has to go top 5. That said, I'm not sure that San Jose does it at 4, because Will Smith is a far safer pick. And, you know, they're just dying for high-end offensive talent in their prospect pool. So I don't think that they would be upset about getting Will Smith at 4. Then you move to Montreal. Do they really need another small goal-scoring winger? No, they don't. I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Nick Bobrov might be intrigued. Their head of scouting, Nick Bobrov, might want to take a flyer on Michkov. It's hard to know. You mentioned Bardo. You know, Bardo, you indicated that, you know, that you see Reinbacher going to Arizona right away, but Arizona could take Michkov and then try to sell the team and move.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think Reinbacher is a possibility at 5 for Montreal, but let me throw this scenario out here. I mean, it almost seems like every year within the second half of the top 10, there's always somebody who just is almost like that we look at as a reach, that will just jump up because they just are in love with him for whatever reason, or it's positional value, whatever it is. I think Michkov, the fact that he's not going to be here until 26 is going to scare people. It probably won't scare a team like the Flyers because they are just starting the rebuild. They could sell that to their fan base and say, look, by the time we're good, we're going to be inserting an all-world player. But you know what? You got to be patient with us. So there's that piece of it. But I mean, I could see somebody like Dvorsky moving up to 5 because he's a center, because of the position he plays. I mean, I can see him going 5 ahead of Michkov. He's probably not as skilled as him, but I just think because there's just a lot of, factors bubbling in that I just think that's a possibility that we should look out for. But yeah, I mean, look, if he gets to 7 or 8 to Philly, if Philly passes on him, then I think Washington will take him. But I think Philly is going to be where he ends up.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
A lot of people think Dvorsky. Go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, I mean, reading what some scouts have been saying, I forget what article it was. I think it might have been through The Athletic, but a lot of scouts are feeling that, there's kind of that consensus top 5 as far as talent goes, with those 5 forwards being Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, Smith, and Michkov. But a lot of scouts are saying, well, Dalibor Dvorsky deserves to be in that conversation too. So I could definitely see the Canadians taking him at 5. I could see the Coyotes taking him at 6. I could see the Flyers taking him at 7, on and on and on. To me, another name that could kind of throw a wrench into things is Ryan Leonard. I could see the Canadians taking him at 5. Kind of almost similar to what happened with Cutter Gauthier last year. Kind of that power winger that teams, especially now after this year, seeing how impactful Matthew Tkachuk was, I think that could definitely raise Leonard's stock a little bit. I mean, he's always kind of been viewed as a top 10 type of guy anyway, but I could see even, as high as 5, Montreal taking Ryan Leonard, and that kind of then creates a little bit of a trickle down effect. So, let's say that Leonard goes 5, Reinbacher goes 6. Now Philadelphia has a decision to make between, do they go, for Michkov and take the swing? Do they go with Dvorsky? To me, if you look at those 8 players, I think that's your top 8 in whatever order that is. But I don't see Michkov getting past 7 or 8. That's for sure. I don't see it.
I will say, Eric, when you say top 5 talents, I mean, I think, there's always that consensus every year. And I think you said, who the top 5 talents are without question, Smith, Bedard, et cetera. But does not necessarily equate to the top 5 picks because there's a lot of factors within that. So, I don't think anybody would argue the top 5 talents, because you could say that about pretty much any draft in any sport. It just, how will the top 5 picks fare? So they all have different philosophies. Right. So
no, it's crazy. It reminds me actually a lot of in 2007, if you remember Alexei Cherepanov, who was drafted by the New York Rangers 19th overall, but going into the draft, there were the same conversations around him as far as being, this guy's a top 5 talented pick. And then everyone just watched him slide and slide and slide because he was going to stay in the KHL. So I don't know, that really could sway the tide though in the first round as far as what we see and how everything lands. Before we get into the second round, is there a player? Yeah, go ahead.
One other thing I wanted to add too, when we're talking about prospect development timeline and stuff, if people are scared off by Michkov not coming over for 3 years, if you're the Flyers at 7, for example, if you're deciding, do we go Michkov? Do we go Ryan Leonard if he's there? Do we go Dvorsky? First of all, Dalibor Dvorsky just signed I think a 2-year contract to stay in Sweden. So that's something just to make note of as well. That could affect his draft stock. But at that spot, you're probably going to be waiting 2 or 3 years regardless of who you're taking. So at that point, you kind of have to look at just the straight up talent. Okay, do I want to wait 2 years for a guy that's probably going to be, maybe a second liner? Or do I wait 3 years for a guy who could be a bona fide superstar? That's something to consider. Now, obviously, the Russian factor factors into that. We all know that. But then you also have people like Craig Button saying that he has no concern about Michkov eventually coming over. So, and that there's, I think he, specifically said no risk when it comes to that. So if someone that respected and that knowledgeable in the community is kind of saying some of those things, then you kind of start looking at, okay, if you're waiting 3 years for him versus 2 or 3 years for someone else, kind of a no-brainer at that point. So that's kind of just, one thing to make note of. And then I also wanted to throw one more name into the equation here for potentially number 19. When you started talking about Sharapanov, that kind of made me think of this guy, Daniil But, who is obviously a big Russian winger.
Yep.
A lot of people are saying just as far as the raw talent and, the package that he has to offer is, top 10, potentially even top 5 in this draft class. But then you add in the Russian factor and that kind of drops the stock a little bit. So, and I do believe that that's a player that the Blackhawks are very interested in. And I think they would strongly consider him at 19 if he is available. I don't know that, he'll be top 10. I don't see that. But I could definitely see him, if we're talking about big wingers going to Buffalo, I could see the Sabres taking him. I could see a number of teams in the teens taking the swing on Daniil But and, hoping that works out, because when you have a guy that's, 6'4", 6'5", can skate fairly well for his size and, has an extremely good shot, that's a pretty tantalizing package for sure.
I will say if Montreal is sitting there at 5 and Michkov is on the board, I think they call Philadelphia and Washington right away and say, give me your best offer. Because if you want this kid and this kid's going to be a superstar, give me your best offer.
100%. Yeah. If he ends up in Philadelphia, if Michkov ends up in Philadelphia and at 22, Daniil But is still available, that would be pretty interesting. If the Flyboys said, all right, let's go get both of these guys. And I think that could be a good selling point for both wingers. But yeah, Daniil But of the Eric Daze mold, a 6'5" and 200 pounds and pretty decent skater. All right, one more question before we start getting into the needs later on in the draft. Is there any player that you feel fits Chicago's mold where they could make a reasonable trade to trade up into the lower teens or perhaps 11 or 12? But I'm saying Matthew Wood. I actually, Eric, I think you hit the nail on the head. He was the first player that you mentioned. I don't want him to go to Buffalo. He will probably end up in Buffalo. At the same time, I mean, if he is there and the Hawks can move one of their second round picks or move back in the second round, they can dangle that 35th overall pick potentially, which is their earliest pick in the second round, or maybe some of their later picks in the second round. They also have so much draft capital in 2024. They still have 2 first-round picks already, 4 second-round picks already, where you can dangle some of those. Matthew Wood is a kind of player that I would love to see them move up for. Does anyone disagree, or is there anyone else on the board, within reason, that is? I don't think, players like Will Smith, Ryan Leonard, anyone in the top 10, I don't think teams are going to move for, because I think they're going to want to hold on to that talent. But are there any other players within reason that you'd love to see them move up for if they had to have them?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think short of somebody that's just really good, like you said, falling, which this draft is, I would say, one of the most unpredictable in recent memory. So who knows what might happen? I mean, you might have someone that you thought is a top 5, top 6, top 7 type of guy that starts falling. Maybe the Sweden contract with Dvorsky scares some people off and he starts falling into the teens. maybe you call up and try to get him. But, realistically, yeah, I would say Matthew Wood is someone that you consider it depending on what the price is. Let's suppose that Buffalo, that he's their guy and they're taking him at 13. Well, now you're probably looking at, you have to make a trade with Vancouver at 11 or Arizona at 12. And, I could see either of those teams potentially being interested in moving back and acquiring some extra picks there. So it could happen. At the same time, I could also see Vancouver being really interested in Matthew Wood as well for multiple reasons. But, I think he's the type of guy, just the profile that the player has, that could be worth, depending on what the cost is. That said, and I talked about this in my article, but I don't see the likely cost of moving up being worth, doing it, because you're probably still going to have an extremely good player sitting there at 19 that it's like, okay, the guy that we get at 19, if he's 90% of the player that Matthew Wood is or whoever, and we're having to give up at least a second and probably something else to move up 7 spots, it might be worth it, but it's kind of a tough sell. So, but yeah, he's really the only one that I would say, yeah, you give that a long look and really consider doing it. Otherwise, I just stand pat at 19.
Yeah,
Bardo,
I agree.
thinking similarly on that.
I would stand pat at 19 unless somebody who was projected to go in the top 10 falls. Like if by some miracle Ryan Leonard is sitting there at 10 or 11, like hell, I'm basically going scorch earth to go up and get him because he's a top 10 talent. I know he's a winger, and it contradicts what I said earlier, but I think he has a chance to be a special like Matthew Tkachuk kind of player. But apart from that, I mean, look, if Michkov somehow is there at 10 or 11, God, I would move up for him too. I mean, but who knows? But apart from that, I think you're right. I think just the value and the difference in terms of the player that would be there at 11 or 12, assuming the top 10 falls the way that we expect it, then I just think the positional value is not going to be that great. Though I will say that I do expect somebody who we see in all these mock drafts that's projected to go in the top 10. I do think somebody is going to fall outside of it because it always happens. There's always somebody that makes some crazy pick at number 8 and just somebody that we just, think is going to be a reach, and just, that just happens. So, sometimes it works. You get a Moritz Seider who no one had on their radar as a top 5. Sometimes it's Elias Anderson, like who the Rangers took at 8 several years ago. So you never know. But I just feel like it always happens. Somebody off the radar is going to move into the top 10, at least one.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. There's no question that. I mean, all these mock drafts, everything that we're saying right now, when all is said and done and it's laid out there and you see who picked who, it's going to be drastically different than any of us predicted.
Yes.
That's just the way that it goes. But I agree that staying with 19 with kind of the level of talent that will be available is a really big is the right play. It's definitely the right play. So moving into the second round, with the 4 second round picks that the Blackhawks have, and they have the 35th overall pick. We're talking about people dropping out of the top 10. There will probably be first round talent available at 35 for the Blackhawks. And it wasn't that long ago. Well, actually it was June of 2011 when a guy named Brandon Saad fell to 43rd overall. And people couldn't believe it when he was there, and the Hawks scooped him up, and he was obviously an integral part of 2 cups. Are there a few players out there, Eric? Do you think that they stick to the forward position with that 35th pick? And what else happens in the second round? We've talked about goaltending needs. There's 3 goalies that could go in the second round, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on those guys as well. So let's start with 35th pick, and then what other kind of action do you expect the Hawks to have in the second round if they hold on to all 4 picks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think starting out with what you just said there, that if I would say the chances of them making all 4 of those second round picks are slim. We were just talking about, do you move up from 19? To me, the far better value proposition is you package a couple of those second round picks and get another late first round pick to get, one of those forwards that you really like, that maybe they started falling. Maybe you pass on Musty at 19 and he's still sitting there at 27 or 28, and you say, we got to get this guy. We're moving up, getting another first round pick to get him. Right. Daniil Boot, Callum Ritchie, whoever, Sam Hanzik, whoever's still there.
Yeah.
And, just based on how unpredictable this draft is and how deep this draft is too, there are going to be those type of guys that you were legitimately considering at 19. They're going to be sitting there in the late 20s and potentially even into the second round. So let's suppose that they do not make any trades. That's unlikely. I think based on what Davidson has said, they'll probably not make all of the picks that they currently have. But as things stand right now, we only know what we know. That's the picks they have. So let's say they are picking at 35. Like I said, I think that there is someone that you are probably seriously considering at 19 that's probably still sitting there, whether that be a forward, which is probably more likely. Again, looking at how, the team feels about their blue line pipeline, I just don't see a case where even at 35 that you're taking a defenseman unless it's a guy that, for lack of a better term, just falls into your lap at 35. Let's say that Willander is still there, you take him. Mm-hmm. Let's say that, a guy that I really like and a lot of people really like is Oliver Bonk. Last name sounds familiar, as it should, son of Radek Bonk. He's kind of that, two-way type of defenseman, right-handed defenseman, so that's important. The Blackhawks do not need left-handed defensemen. They have way too many left-handed defensive prospects. So if they're using a relatively valuable pick on a defenseman, it's going to be a right-handed defenseman. So if Willander is there at 35 somehow, which he will not be, maybe say Axel Sandin-Pellikka falls that far, which he won't. Maybe you take him. If Bonk is there, I think that could be a legitimate consideration, just kind of because of what he offers. And a lot of people feel that he'll probably be a late first round pick, maybe could even, be as high as, 20, 21, 22, somewhere in there in the 20s, that he'll probably go somewhere in the 20s. So, if he's still there at 35, maybe you consider it. But otherwise, you're probably looking at a forward. And like I said, there's probably still going to be a guy that you were thinking about at 19 that's going to be there at 35. A couple guys that we didn't talk about earlier that are kind of in that, bigger, power forward type of a profile that, you might think about at 35. There's guys like David Edstrom. There's guys like Anton Wahlberg. And a guy that I know, former Rink member Mario Tirabassi, who of course is now with CHGO. Charlie Stramel from Wisconsin, I think, is a guy that could make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. The thing about those three guys is that they don't have that high end offensive upside that some of those earlier guys that we talked about do. So to me, if you're taking one of those guys, it's because you just love their all around package and say this is the type of guy you win with long term. I can't argue that. So, but yeah, just looking, you're talking about there's going to be a first round talent there. There's no question about that. There always is every year, but knowing how deep this draft class is, there's probably going to be first round talent still sitting there at 44. So you're going to get a really solid player no matter who it is. But yes, I think you're probably still looking at a forward in that spot. Ideally, somebody with some size like we talked about earlier. I don't know if Bar, do you want to touch on 35 at all before we go into the other second rounders?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you were saying. I do think it's more likely that they move back up into the first round than make all four picks. Look, and I think what you said about, you're going to get somebody who maybe doesn't have, the elite skill that you want, but it has an all-around game. I mean, once upon a time, the Hawks took Dave Boland, who was a very high scorer in junior, but he was projected to be sort of that middle six center who, has an all-around game and plays a two-way game. Brian Bickle was another guy. So, there's always talent in the second round. So, yeah, there's going to be somebody in the first round that falls and maybe they get aggressive and jump up to that late first round to grab him, or maybe, they get lucky and somebody drops to 35. But But I do agree. I think, look, I mean, they just need to stick to their board, stick to their draft board. They've gone through this process, so that's what they need to do.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And you mentioned Stramel and Edstrom, Eric, and I think that those are two guys. Their size is critical if they've got that the right mentality. And like you said, these are guys that you win with that maybe don't have that high end talent that you'll see in the top 10. If those guys fall to 35 and are available, I don't know how you don't take a flyer on one of those two or bunk, like you said. But in a talent rich draft like this one, there's going to be some really, really good players that are going to fall at 35. Now, what about the goaltending scenario? You got Drew Comesso, who just finished his sophomore season at BU that has signed, I believe, with the Blackhawks. But then other than that, in the prospect pool, it might be time to take a run at a goaltender. And there will be some in the second round. And if you do have a surplus of picks in the second round, that is usually a good spot to take a chance on someone. I know a name that's been thrown a lot lately is Adam Gagin. Gagin was the goalie that unfortunately was on the wrong end of Connor Bedard's brilliance in the World Junior Tournament, that classic goal on 3-on-3 that you saw. But other than that, he had a complete rock star tournament for Team Slovakia. He's going to Minnesota Duluth next fall. Is Gagin a kind of goalie that you would like to see the Hawks take a run at? And who are some of the other names that might be in that fabric that could go in, a little bit later in the second round, maybe around that 55 spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely like Gagin. I think that he would be a good use of a pick in the second round. Looking at the goalies for this draft class, there's really 4 that are kind of like in that top tier for goalies. So obviously you've got Michael Herbel, who I think most people would say is the consensus number 1 option out of those 4. Pretty much purely just based on the size. I mean, the guy is just massive. I think he's 6'6" or maybe even 6'7", but he's still a very athletic goalie. So he'll go very high. I mean, he could even sneak late into the first round. If not, people are thinking that he'll go in the 30s for sure. So, theoretically, if you're just in love with Herbel and he's there at 35, could you take him? Sure. Would that be the best use of the pick? In my opinion, probably not. So it's at least something to think about. But starting at 44, then you're starting to look at those other 3 goalies. So you got Gagin, like we were talking about. You also have Carson Bjarnason, who's a Canadian goalie. Then you have Trey Augustine from the U.S. National Team Development Program. And, like I said, all 3 of those guys, firmly factor into that top 4 group. I think most people would say that Gagin and Bjarnason are kind of interchangeable between second and third of the group. I prefer Gagin just because I think his trajectory over this last year has just been, very exciting. Just seeing how much progress he has actually made is really remarkable. I mean, he wasn't even supposed to be playing in the World Juniors. He was an injury replacement and then kind of got thrown into the starter job and took it and ran with it. And, just seeing, that progress is very, very intriguing for sure. And, whereas Bjarnason has kind of more so always been that touted goalie prospect, kind of like the Canadian goalie from this crop. So, there's always been a spotlight on him going back a year or two, and not that he hasn't done anything to justify that. I think he'll be a solid goalie and will go in the second round for sure. But I think Gagin probably has a little bit more upside just from what we've seen. Extremely agile, very athletic. And still has a little bit of that size. I think he's 6'2", so not a huge goalie like Herbel is, but he's not small either, like a UC Saros or anything. So, I think those are. Sorry.
Oh no, I just said he's a good sized kid. Sorry, folks. Again, if you hear any delay, that's me and my internet. But I said Gagin is a good sized kid, not the size of Hrabel, but he is good size and he's just very athletic. Yeah. And Hrabel going to be at UMass Amherst next fall, which should be interesting. Follow Bardo. We like that a lot.
So anyway, but I think if you're looking at Gagin or Bjarnason, I think you're probably, if you want to guarantee, quote unquote, guarantee that you get one of those guys you probably have to do it at 44. I think that it's probably 50-50 that one of them is there at 51 still. If you're waiting until 55, they could still be there, but I don't know that I would rely on that. So if you're just comfortable getting one of those 4 and you're okay if it's Trey Augustine, then maybe you wait until 55. I think that one of them will probably still be there at 55, but if you want to add, a goalie to the pipeline, which I think is a good idea, it sounds like that's kind of, it's about time where they're needing to add another one, understanding that this isn't going to be a guy that jumps right into the AHL or the ECHL. It's going to be someone that takes a few years, and just kind of that timeline of the rotation of goalies through your system, you probably want to look at adding one. And, you can't go wrong with adding, a more highly touted goalie, especially when you have this many picks. So to me, I think you do try to get Gajan or Bjarnason. And if you really want to make sure you get one of them, I think you do it at 44. If you're okay with one or the other, then maybe you wait until 51. But definitely a good group of goalies to choose from for sure.
What's your take on Ratzlaff? I've seen him as high as like even 2 or 3 in terms of the top goalies, and I've seen him down low because he's probably the most athletic out of all these kids. It's just he's not as big as them, and everyone's looking for the big goalie.
I think, to me, I think the thing that's hurt him the most is the fact that he was behind Thomas Milic in Seattle this year. And Milic is an overager who's still eligible in this draft, and he will definitely get picked in this draft for sure. But he's already I don't know if he's turned 20 yet or not, but he was the starter for the Thunderbirds, and he played for the Canadian World Junior team and stuff. So he was kind of taking away ice time from Scott Ratzlaff, especially in Seattle. And, so I think that could kind of weigh into where Ratzlaff goes. I mean, I think he'll still be a top 100 pick in the draft for sure. But I don't know that he gets into the second round. I think he's probably more of a third round type of goalie, just based on the body of work that he had this year. I think the talent is there. Obviously, the Blackhawks have seen a lot of him, given that they had, a trio of guys playing for the Thunderbirds this year. They're certainly very familiar with Ratzlaff and his game and stuff. But I don't know. To me, it's, do you roll the dice on that smaller workload and hope that the potential, pans out, and he has he'll definitely have the starting job in Seattle next year. There's no doubt about that. But, it's kind of, do you take a risk on a guy who you haven't necessarily seen as much of compared to guys that had, bona fide starting jobs?
Yeah.
So to me, I don't know, if you're going to go for a guy that, is maybe not a giant like Crable is, so if you're going with kind of that middle-sized goalie, I would much rather go for a guy like Gajan than Ratzlaff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you like. I mean, if you like the athletic goaltender who is, he's 6'1", 6'2", it's not terrible, but it's not 6'5" or 6'6" either, and everyone's going for those bigger goalies these days. So it just depends on, what teams want from a trend perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that the Hawks don't let they don't let the second round go by without taking a flyer on a goalie. I mean, I wouldn't panic if that's the case, but as Eric, you said, and Bardo, with the surplus of picks that they have, this is the time to do that. And there's some really good ones out there. So folks, be expecting a goalie in the second round, or we're hoping for that. We are approaching the hour in our draft preview. Before I just shift gears, because I want to talk 10 minutes about free agency. Are there any final thoughts on what to look for in the draft, or what you guys are excited about players that we have not mentioned yet that the Blackhawks should be thinking about, or that we should be excited about should the Blackhawks take one of them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that are very interesting in this draft class for a number of reasons. I won't go through every single guy that I named in my article. I think I named over 60 guys. So if you want to see a bunch of names and kind of where they factor in, read the article and you'll see all those. But I'll go through at least a few other guys. I am expecting that they have not taken a defenseman at 19 or 35. So at that point, 44 would kind of be the first opportunity there. A guy that I really like, who, if he was still there at 44, I would be thrilled to get him. I don't know that he will be. I think he's probably more a guy that goes in the 30s, but that's Maxim Sturbach is just a big-bodied, physical defenseman, that can still move the puck. But, I think that's kind of, if you're looking at their prospect pool on the blue line, especially on that right side, kind of having that bigger-bodied, sound defensive, physical forward or defenseman, Sturbach just fits that hole really, really well. And I think, that if he's there at 44, that would be a really nice addition to their pipeline. Other guys that could go in the second round, there's a Finnish power winger named Kasper Halttunen that I think is pretty intriguing, kind of has a pretty well-rounded toolkit, but nothing is necessarily super high end. So he's probably more of a guy that would kind of be like a middle six type of winger that, every winning team needs those big-bodied guys that can do a little bit of everything. So that's kind of a guy that I envision in that type of a mold. Going back to the Seattle Thunderbirds, Niko Mijatovic is another interesting name. He's kind of a guy that's kind of risen up the draft boards a little bit throughout the season. Kind of seemed like he would be a third or fourth rounder. And now it seems like if you want to get him, you're probably going to have to take him in the second round. Just kind of a bigger bodied power winger that can, again, do a little bit of everything. So, knowing that they are obviously very well in tune with the Seattle Thunderbirds, that's a guy that I could see them taking with one of those second round picks. Once you start getting into the third and fourth round, it's kind of a crapshoot of who's still going to be available. But again, I listed a number of different names that could be interesting if they're still available. So I won't bore everybody with a bunch of later draft pick potential names, but it'll be very interesting to see what direction they go with a lot of these picks.
Yeah, I do like some of the things that you're saying, though, Eric, particularly with if you're going to target kind of bigger, more rugged defensemen, a lot of those will be available late into the draft. Some of them coming, straight out of even the Minnesota high school ranks, places like that. Sturbach going off to Michigan State in the fall. He'd be an awesome pick. See him in some Big Ten hockey. And you wouldn't believe it if I told you, but I'm adding someone to the stream right now who we've been waiting for quite some time. Hello, Mr. Fitzgerald. How are you doing this evening, buddy?
I am wonderful, just wonderful. I don't know if you guys said this, but
Sean Fitzgerald is here.
Daily reminder, the Blackhawks are not trading the first pick and Connor Bedard. They're not trading him. I'm tired of the narrative. So I just wanted to, put it on the podcast so everybody listens will hear it, because I keep tweeting it out daily, because every day I see an egregious, idiotic, and any other adjective you can think of trade request.
But not even for – well, what if I offered – okay. Never mind.
Yeah.
So we did touch base on that all too briefly to open up the show, and that was the right move. And Sean, my forgiveness, a lot of times it's your internet. Tonight it's my hamster wheel that's not going very well. My guys are a little bit sleepy. They're not running very fast. So if there's a delay and a little bit of a pause, Eric's been dealing with it nicely. It actually gives the folks a little bit of a warm up before Eric gets into the draft analysis when there's a pause beforehand, which is really helpful. Yeah, it's been great.
Did you guys?
He's certainly been. You missed it. He's been taking heels in. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, his article on the Rink.com was very informative on draft prospects and things of that nature. So if people haven't checked that out, I highly recommend that.
I do want to throw out one sleeper that that I read about. You guys know I'm a big college hockey guy, especially the Hockey East, because as a UMass alum. But there's a kid, Brandon Swoboda. I don't know, Eric, if you're familiar with him. So he played in the USHL this past year. Didn't play much, but scouts are impressed by him, and I think he's going to BU. But he's a big kid, so I think he's like 6'4" or something like that. But he's a guy that I think, could be sort of a middle round steal, perhaps, as somebody who could be a valuable piece to a team, as you're building.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's not a guy.
like that.
I've heard the name, but I haven't looked into him a whole lot. But that's the type of profile that I think they really need to be exploring in this draft. Is those bigger type of guys that you can project, how their game is going to transfer to the NHL level, especially if they can skate fairly well, which I believe he can from the limited stuff that I've heard.
Yeah, I don't remember. I've only watched like a few highlights of him, and he didn't really play a lot, but scouts saw enough of him when he did play that they think that with more playing time, with more experience, and perhaps, I don't know if he's going to stick with the USHL this year. He has committed to, I believe it's BU, like I said. So if it is BU, then I think
he's going to Boston University.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good program to develop. So,
and here's the thing too. We've talked about this earlier in the show, but when you have as many picks as they do, why not swing for the fences with a few of them? I mean, they did it last year with Sam Renzel. So if you're looking at a mid-round pick on this guy, why not?
Yeah, they're lottery tickets. That's what these things are. It's like, you pick them, and you're not going to hit on every one of them, but the more you have, the more, you're going to probably better chances that you have that you're going to hit on more of them.
And organizational depth is a huge thing. Like, even if you, let's say in the later rounds, you draft a guy who's a 4A player, those are still useful in your organization because they're cheap and you can recycle through those every couple of years. That's just a big, when Kyle Davidson inherited the Blackhawks organization, that's one of the biggest things, that they didn't have any depth. Not only did they have any top end talent, but they definitely didn't have any depth to just fill out an NHL roster. That's why Stan Bowman was overpaying the Ryan Carpenters of the world and people like the Drake Kajulas of the world, like correct, whatever the hell his name is.
I will say this about
you got it right. Amazingly, you got it right.
I will say this about the organization, and I did mention this in a previous podcast during the season, is the one thing that I really appreciate about, the last year is how much these prospects have advanced and they've all improved under this new regime. So, and I don't know if it's coincidence or if it's how they're developing them, but I mean, just to see the growth of these guys, like even Nolan Allen has grown, and seeing just other guys, even from the last draft class, was it Ryan Green, among others, they're just progressing. And that, to me, and that's why they've jumped from being the worst farm system to now one of the better ones. So I think
and one thing to piggyback off that, I think a plan is very important. And as we've discussed many times, the previous regime didn't have one.
No.
It was just draft skill. It didn't matter how small they were. If they were 5'6", we draft them the first round and hope skill trumps all.
No, great stuff, everybody. I want to talk for 10 minutes because I know we've gone for a while tonight, but I just want to talk for 10 minutes about free agency because sometime after the draft, I believe it's July 1st when free agency opens up. And I want to talk about two names that have been associated with the Blackhawks. One is JT Compher, and the other is Vladimir Tarasenko. On 32 Thoughts, Elliot Friedman suggested that maybe Tarasenko might be someone to put on the ring with in his first year. As a Blackhawk, it's a very seasoned professional, could certainly pump in a lot of goals. I certainly think that they would need some toughness on the other flank with him. But hey, first line, Bedard, Compher, and Tarasenko, anybody? That'd be kind of interesting. Sean, Tarasenko, what do you think?
I think as long as it's not long-term money, if it's a shorter deal at a high value to hit the floor, he's going to help Bedard develop. So I think that's a good move. Also, he's kind of an injury risk for a lot of teams, so maybe the Hawks can overpay in the short term to get him to come to them to play with Bedard. I think it's the right move. You got to add some NHL skill pieces, even if they only ever are on the ice with Bedard. That's fine, because his development is, once he's in the NHL now, his development is the most important thing.
Ardo, what do you think, man?
No, hard no on Tarasenko. I mean, I think his production has dropped. His production has dropped. You know, I just to me, it's just his production's dropped, and there's nothing exciting about that. He's always hurt. I think that part bothers me a lot. I would steer clear of this. I mean, I'm not saying that. I agree with philosophically they need to put a winger of some, you know, experience that can help him along on his line. I just wouldn't force myself to take him as the guy. You know, if I could trade for him, then trade for him. But I just would not sign. I don't think the Hawks should do that. I just hard no.
If he
and then is
did not,
Comfer possibly? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say if Tarasenko didn't play for the Rangers, would that impact your thoughts, Bart?
That's what I was
No,
thinking.
not at all. I mean, it's got nothing to do with the Rangers. It's just I just don't think. I think he's kind of done. You know, I
hear you.
I think he's just dropped. So I wasn't overly he had a couple of decent games with the Rangers, but I wasn't overly impressed with him. I just think his kind of best days are behind him. He's not that feared goal scorer he once was. I mean, I don't want to do this and say that the Hawks just signed the Russian version of Andrew Brunette. I mean, it's just, to me, I don't want that. I mean, we saw Andrew Brunette would just kind of dropped. I mean, you know, like a stone in the ocean as a goal scorer. So, and Comfort, to me, I just feel like he's going to get paid. Somebody's going to pay him like a handsome amount. I think he's going to get a 5-year deal somewhere. I think they're going to blow the Hawks out of the water. If he thinks he's going to come home on a 2-year deal, that's not going to happen. So,
yeah, the only way that he's coming to Chicago is if he just purely wants to come home. And
correct.
At this stage in his career, I don't see him doing that. You know, someone's going to offer him that longer term, given that this free agent class is so weak. Someone's going to give him 4, 5, 6 years and a decent amount of money.
Yeah.
Now, if, you know, kind of going off the Tarasenko mold, one guy that, you know, everyone has been talking about, but if you're going to overpay a guy on a short-term deal, just bring back Max Domi. You know, I know we kind of hate the bring back whoever narrative, but this is one where it actually kind of makes sense. You know, he was a good fit here. He really enjoyed it. The team liked having him. So, you know, and he's still young enough and, you know, has a diverse enough, you know, skill set where maybe he does come back to Chicago for a couple years at even, you know, pay him 6.5 to get him to come.
Yeah.
And he can still cash in, you know, in a couple years and get that maybe a little bit longer term of a deal with a contender if he wants to leave at that point. So, but, you know, yeah, I think that if you're looking for kind of that a little bit higher profile of a guy that you could bring in short-term big money, I think it's more so Domi than somebody like Tarasenko.
I mean, I'll give you another name that I actually would go after before Tarasenko. And
if you say Milan Lucic, I'm leaving.
No, I was my suggestion before. No, actually, I was going to say Alex Killorn. If they could get him on a 2-year deal. I mean, I think he's like 36 now or something like that. But
he's not that
he's like
old.
33 or something.
Okay, well, look,
32.
But he still plays very well. He plays hard. He's a guy that I would actually put on his wing and say, you know what, you're a multi-time Stanley Cup winner. You know, play with a ton of skill guys. He'd be a guy that I would say put with Bedard.
Mm-hmm.
Roll back the tape. I'm pretty sure I said this several months ago too. So I agree with you, Pardo.
Yeah,
that'd be a good fit.
Yeah, I think
this
year's class of UFA.
He's a UFA.
Yeah, this year's class of UFAs is so brutal, though. I mean, this is going to be like a housing crisis where people are just overpaying for just weak talent, and not weak talent, but leaky ceilings, and you know, some fixer-upper projects. I mean, if this is a good year that the Hawks aren't going to get in a bidding war over the kind of guys that are out there. This is a good year to be rebuilding and not have to try to pay anybody. So they do need to hit the floor. So there might be a name or two that we don't love, but that ends up in a Blackhawks uniform. That's just the way that it goes. So
I will say this. I mean, there's a ton of teams out there that are also up against the salary cap. And quite frankly, unless they have to re-sign some of their own guys, like I would not look to move any money to try to sign anybody in this free agent class, because this free agent class is hot, steamy garbage. It is horrible.
Yeah.
Well, you don't love Connor
I would
Brown?
much rather.
Oh, God. Connor Brown is becoming
But I would
John
much rather.
Clem.
I know we talked about John Clem.
John
Clem. Wow, what a name.
Bring back Pius Suter. That was Andy's guy. He's a free agent.
I love Pius. No, but I think that if they are going to try to hit the cap floor with the kind of draft capital that the Hawks have, and you can dip into the 2024 draft if they need to. We talked about it before, but trading for someone to hit the floor like a Taylor Hall to a team that's so desperate, that needs to shed dollars and that has no draft capital whatsoever, I'd be much more interested in doing something like that than signing one of these free agents that,
100%. I would be more on board with trading for somebody and getting a sweetener or two with it versus dipping into free agency. Absolutely. It's not even a question.
Yeah. Well, folks, we've gone for quite a while tonight, and Sean, a little late to the party. Glad to see you, though. Any final thoughts, Sean, before the draft that you're excited about before we declare victory for the evening?
I'm excited about the potential for the future of the Blackhawks. I think that's the biggest optimism in general. Kyle Davidson, say what you will about him, he's done a lot of the groundwork. Now it's time to really start building off of it. He had his first class. Now this will be his second class with the jewel, Connor Bedard. Let's see what he continues to do in the future. But I'm excited. Like, it's the first time in a long time that I've been excited for a rebuilding team to, what their prospects are going to do. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited to see what they do with 19. Are they going to keep the pick? Are they going to trade it? There's like the Penguins, Calgary, they all have extra picks. So I'm excited to see what they do with that.
Bardo, any final shots from your end? We'll go Bardo and then we'll go Eric.
Yes. When in doubt, sign Milan Lucic.
I think they should sign Richard Panik again.
Yeah. Connor Brown is becoming, like I said, every year there's always a guy that just jumps up in free agency and becomes that guy that's going to get overpaid. John Clem and all these other guys, it happens every year. And it's like, geez, Connor Brown was even healthy last year and everyone's apparently going after him.
Oh, God.
Ridiculous.
He's 33 in terms of what they got paid last year for the UFAs. So
dumb.
Yeah, well, Eric, your analysis on the prospect pool was absolutely outstanding tonight. So thanks so much for all of your research and for giving our listeners something to chew on heading into the draft, because it's a really, really valuable stuff. Any parting shots for our listeners as far as what to look for or what you're excited about before we send off for the evening?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be there. I'll be going down to Nashville for the draft. I'll be there both days. So very excited to take it in. I have been to, I think, 4 drafts at this point. So this will be my 5th. First one in a little while. The one in Chicago in 2017 was the last one. So obviously this is going to be a pretty exciting one as a Blackhawks fan. So I will be there. I'll be, live on site. I do plan on tweeting out kind of some reactions to some of their picks and trades and stuff. So keep an eye out on the Twitter machine for that, at WallAxer19. If you're watching on video, you see it under my picture there. So, but yeah, I will at least, for the first few rounds, I'll be giving some reactions to their picks. I probably won't be able to speak for guys in the 6th and 7th round, but yeah, definitely just looking forward to taking it all in and just getting to experience it firsthand. I was fortunate enough to be there in 2007 when they drafted Patrick Kane. So being there for, their second first overall pick in franchise history is going to be really exciting.
Can we get this man a credential, get him on the floor so we can hear some conversations?
We tried.
Damn.
Say, could you wear a Thomas Tatar Blackhawks jersey for like the impending free agent signing? Or
That's hilarious.
So bad. Real quick shout out to our sponsor, as I forgot to in the beginning, but www.puckhockey.com in all caps. Use discount code The Rink, also in all caps. 10% off. You spend $100, you get a free T-shirt. And check out the Wink-Wet Wear, as I say every time I'm on. Thank you so much, everybody. Go Hawks. It's going to be an awesome draft. We'll be around to recap it too. Eric, thanks for all your expertise. Bardo, awesome to see you. Sean, it's never too little too late for you. You always are a value add. Love seeing you too. Happy summer. And take care, everybody. Have a good night.